Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leak. I'm John as always, and it's that time that we have been waiting for. Shadows over Innistrad has been fully spoiled. Every single last card is out there in the wild. We know what every single last card is, so we're going to do the set review. We're going to take a look at all the cards in the set, and we're going to discuss how they will do in a limited format. Today, of course, is going to be the white set review. Tomorrow will be blue, and then black, and then red, and then green, and then possibly one video for everything that's left. Maybe I'll split it into two videos. We'll have to see. Check back then. But today, we are going to do white. First up, I have three disclaimers that some of you will know already, some of you will not. But before I get to the disclaimers, I do want to say spread the word of the Mana Leaks set reviews. If you feel like sharing this on Reddit or MTG Salvation or on your local Facebook groups with your friends at your local store, with whoever, share the set reviews. Share the link. You can grab the link from down below in the YouTube share options, or from the address bar up top, or on your phone, or wherever you're watching this. Just spread the word. Get this out there. I want people to become better at Limited. I want people to like Limited, so make sure that you do spread the word. But on to those three disclaimers. Disclaimer number one, as I've said a couple of times, and as you really need to know, this is a limited set review. This is for primarily draft, and to a lesser extent sealed. I will of course talk about sealed, since that is the pre-release format coming up in 1 week from now, but this is a limited focus podcast. None of the grades, none of the ratings, none of the comments have anything to do with standard or modern or legacy or vintage or EDH or tiny leaders or Canadian Highlander or anything like that. I might mention it here or there, but I am not a big constructed player, and I'm not going to be discussing these cards in a constructed setting. I'm talking about limited only. Disclaimer number two, these are my first impressions of the cards. I have not played with many of these cards. Because I started or restarted my Magic career during Innistrad, I have played with some of the reprints, but some reprints I may not have played. And of course, the new cards I haven't touched yet. I haven't played with them. So there's definitely going to be cards that I'm not going to quite grasp exactly how well they'll do in this format. But I am going off my first impression card evaluation skills, which is something you definitely want to get better at. You want to be able to look at a card and kind of figure out how that will work in a vacuum, how that will work in previous sets that you've played. I'm using all of that knowledge to go to these, but these are my first impressions. These are how I'm going to approach the cards next weekend. These are how I'm going to approach the cards in 2 weeks at my very first F&M with Shadows over Innistrad. But my impressions might change over time. And of course, as you saw yesterday, I do top 10 cards I was wrong about lists every single set. So I may be wrong, but these are my first impressions. That goes into number three. Disclaimer number three, I might be wrong. I'm open for discussion. I love seeing people talk about my set reviews and talk about my ratings and talk about the set in general with me and with each other in the comments down below. I may be wrong. You may be wrong. Everybody might be wrong about the ratings. It's definitely good to get extra pairs of eyes on these set reviews and on ratings and really kind of discuss things to figure out how cards may kind of shape up in the format. It's good to hear other people's point of views. It's good to think about your own point of view. I fully encourage discussion in the comments below. Keep it civil, please, but absolutely encourage discussion in the comments down below. But without further ado, we're going to get right on into the first white card of Shadows over Innistrad. Up first, we have Always Watching, which really should have been called Tangible Virtue, but Always Watching. 1 white for an enchantment at rare. Non-token creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Vigilance. Intangible Virtue, of course, was, I believe, 1 and a white, I think, for an enchantment that gave your token creatures +1/+1. I don't believe it gave Vigilance, though. But anyways, Always Watching, it's an anthem. It's an anthem for all of your creatures, and anthems are good. They're quite good, especially when they hit your entire board. There have been anthems in the past that give +1/+1 to all of your white creatures or things like this. But hitting generally your entire board, it's not going to hit your human tokens or your spirit tokens, but it's going to hit a good chunk of your board, is good. This is definitely something that you should consider taking pack one, pick one, and going kind of white weenies aggro, going probably white-red aggro, I would believe. I'm not sure if it's an amazing idea to do that, but it's definitely not the worst, and it's something that I do in drafts where it's supported. I do love playing white weenies, and white weenies really hasn't been a deck in quite a long time. I think this is a good chance for it to come back. snap pick this if you're already in white. If you can already cast this reliably, pack 2, pack 3, take it. Take it for sure. It's not bomby exactly, but I think it is just shy of kind of being reliably first pickable. I'm going to go with a B+ on this. I really like anthems. I really like anthems that hit almost my entire board. So I've got to go with a B+ on this. I'll take this pretty highly, and I'll probably first pick it here or there when I feel like going super aggressive white weenies. Next up, we have Angel of Deliverance. Angel of Deliverance is a 6 white. You heard me right. 6 white, 8 mana. Creature angel at rare for a 6/6, flying with Delirium. Delirium is a new mechanic in Shadows over Innistrad. Delirium says, if you have 4 types of cards in your graveyard, type being land, planeswalker, artifact, enchantment, instant, sorcery, creature, tribal, which doesn't have any impact, I think those are all of them. If you have 4 of those types amongst your cards in the graveyard, then something happens. The spell becomes more powerful. The creature has an extra ability. Something kind of happens. So this says Delirium. Whenever Angel of Deliverance deals damage, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, exile target creature an opponent controls. I'll be shortening that to if you have Delirium for future cards. So if you have Delirium, whenever Angel of Deliverance deals damage, you can exile a creature that an opponent controls. That's a pretty powerful effect. As you'll hear me talk about again and again, I am super nervous about Delirium. Super nervous. Getting a creature into the graveyard, really easy. That's going to happen turn 2, turn 3. That's going to happen. You're going to have a creature in the graveyard. Getting a land into a graveyard, fairly easy. 17 of your 40 cards are going to be lands. Milling one of those, there's a lot of self-mill in this. Milling one of those, discarding one of those into your graveyard is going to be really easy. Getting the other 2 types is going to be hard. There's not a ton of playable artifacts. There's not a ton of playable enchantments. And the playable ones, you don't want to go to the graveyard. You want them to be enchanting your creatures or doing their artifacty things. So I'm really not sure how regularly you're going to get Delirium on. Instants and sorceries are probably going to be one of the best ways to get Delirium turned on because you're going to be casting them anyways, and once you cast them, they go to the graveyard. I'm really reminded of Spell Mastery from Magic Origins, which required you to have 2 instant and or sorceries in your graveyard. 2 cards, and they could be the same. You could have 2 instants and Spell Mastery was turned on. Spell Mastery was so rarely turned on in Magic Origins that I'm just not sure that having something that takes twice the effort or even more, since they all have to be unique types, is really going to be turned on all that long. So I'm treating Delirium somewhat as flavor text, somewhat as a win more, somewhat as a it's nice if it turns on, but don't expect it to be a super common thing. So we're looking at an 8 mana 6/6 flyer that if we turn it on and if we do combat damage, we get to exile a creature. Or sorry, not combat damage, any type of damage, but probably combat damage. To me, I've got to say big whoop. If I'm doing 6 damage to them in the air, I should just be winning. Like in a couple of turns, I should be winning. Exiling creatures is just really win more. This card screams win more. I'm at 8 mana, I can cast a 6/6 flyer, I can then start exiling things. It's all win more. It's all win more. The number of times that you're going to die with this in your hand because you just didn't get to 8 mana is going to be huge. I don't want to touch this. 8 mana needs to literally say you win the game for me to generally want to play it. So I'm really out on Angel of Deliverance. If you cast it, you should win. It may take a little bit of time, but it's so vulnerable to removal. It gets hit by everything. It doesn't have hexproof. It doesn't have anything to stop removal. It can't be burned out that easily, but 8 mana is such a hard sell for me. It's such a hard sell for me. I've got to go low on this. I'm going to go C- on this. I just can't justify 8 mana, especially in white. If it was in green, maybe. But in 8 mana, I'm out on this. C-. I'm going to pass this probably every single last time that I open it. Anyways, rant over. On to Angelic Purge. Angelic Purge is 2 and a white for a sorcery at common. As an additional cost to cast Angelic Purge, sacrifice a permanent. Exile target artifact, creature, or enchantment. So it's Bone Splitters +++. You can sack anything. You can sack a land. You can sack a clue token, which we'll talk about when we get to investigate. You can sack anything. You can sack that little 1/1 that you don't care about anymore. And it not only kills creatures, it kills artifacts and enchantments. And it not only kills them, it exiles them. This has generated quite a lot of discussion already. There's one group of players that are saying this is amazing in Limited, this is insane, this is the total top tier removal. The other group are saying this is terrible in Limited. Why do I want to sack things just to kill something at 3 mana? This is terrible. I'm totally in the middle. I'm really in the middle. It's not insane. I wouldn't want to run multiples of these things. And it doesn't help too much if I'm falling behind. I can't play it in the early game unless I've got some really cheap tokens I don't care about for some reason. So really, I think you should treat this kind of as a 6-drop removal spell. Turn 6, you can probably sack a land and not really care. You probably have a clue token. You probably have a creature that's just not going to do anything for the rest of the game. So by treating this as a 6-drop removal, I think it's super solid. I think it's totally solid. I'll probably always play the first one. Just being able to kill anything, including any problem artifacts or enchantments. There aren't too many, but being able to do that, this is just totally solid. The first one I think should be in probably every single white deck. Maybe not the most aggressive of white decks, but generally I think every white deck would be happy with one of these. Multiples I think you should stay away from unless you're a pretty dedicated token deck or clue token deck or something like that. I've got to go with B- though. I don't think I'll ever first pick it, but I'll pick it kind of high mid pick. And I'll definitely take it a little bit more highly in later packs when I know I'm white for sure. But B- for Angelic Purge. Next up, we have Apothecary Geist. Apothecary Geist is 3 and a white for a creature's spirit at common. It's a 2/3 flyer, and when Apothecary Geist enters the battlefield, if you control another spirit, you gain 3 life. This is fine. This is totally fine. It's a fair bit better than your spirit deck, of course, in which case it's a slightly better Courier Griffin, which was always okay. Courier Griffin was 3 and a white and gained you 2 life. This gains you 3 life if you have another spirit. Outside of that deck, it's a little less good. It's just a 2/3 flyer for 4, which is still okay. You know, it's generally the right cost for those stats on a flyer. Prioritize this a little bit higher in the later packs if you're in spirits for sure, and even if you're in white, you'd probably be pretty happy with the first one of these. You may not want to load up on them, but I think you'd still be fairly okay. So I've got to go with the C+. I'll probably main deck this a little bit more than I cut it, and I'll certainly main deck it all the time in blue-white spirits. Next up, we've got a big one. We've got Archangel Avastin. Archangel Avastin is a 3 white mythic 4/4 flash flying vigilance creature legendary angel. When Archangel Avastin enters the battlefield, creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. When a non-angel creature you control dies, transform Archangel Avastin at the beginning of the next upkeep. Transform is from the first Innistrad set, and it's back in this set. Transform means you actually flip the card over to its backside. So on the backside, we have Avastin the Purifier. Avastin the Purifier is a legendary creature angel at Mythic. She's a 6/5 flyer, and when this creature transforms into Avastin the Purifier, it deals 3 damage to each other creature and to each opponent. So a couple quick things about Transform. The backside doesn't have a mana cost, but the rules have changed. Its converted mana cost is whatever the front side is. So Avastin the Purifier has a CMC of 5. In the olden days, i.e. today, actually, everything until next Friday, Avastin the Purifier would have been 0. So just be aware of that. Something else to know, when they transform, they don't leave the battlefield, so all counters stay on them, all auras stay attached to them, all equipment stays attached to them. They don't go anywhere, they just flip over. The other thing to know about is when drafting these, you can't hide them. You can't try to play these mind games of, ooh, I'm going to cover this card, and then I'm going to hide it under my hand while I have it on top of my pile. You can't do that. It's open information. Generally, what we do at my store and what a lot of stores do is we just say, hey, this is the double-face card I open. That way, there's no mind games. There's no trying to stretch and see what everybody has to make sure that you're not losing any disadvantages. It's open information. You open this double-face card, everybody at the table has the right to know what card that is. So just be aware of that for the drafting procedure. But anyways, Archangel Avastin. Oh boy. 3 white for a 4/4 flyer vigilance. That's Sarah Angel. Sarah Angel is bonkers in Limited. This isn't just Sarah Angel. She has flash. She can surprise you. She gives indestructible to everybody on your battlefield when she comes down. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. That right there. Everything I just said is A material for me, arguably even A+ material for me. But she also flips. She also flips when a non-angel creature you control dies, which is generally going to happen, although unfortunately will often happen at your opponent's discretion. But if you have a sack outlet, you can do it as well. But when that happens, suddenly she flips over, she gets a little bit bigger, becomes a 6/5 flyer, and she deals 3 damage to everything on the battlefield and each opponent. She maybe just kills your opponent, which would really suck for your opponent. But she also kills a ton of the creatures on the board, including yours. It is symmetrical, so make sure that you have some things that are going to survive. Although as long as everything dies, you still have a 6/5 flyer, which is still just absolutely huge. I'm so sold on Avastin. So sold. She is A+. She is first pickable. If you pass Avastin, you've done something wrong. Pack one, pick one. If you pass her, you have done something wrong. Absolute first pickable. Sarah Angel was first pickable. This is 17 Sarah Angels taped together. Total A+. Never passing this. I want to open this card so bad. Next up, we have Abyssinian Missionaries. This is another transform card. Abyssinian Missionaries on the front side is 3 white for an uncommon creature human cleric 3/3. And then at the beginning of your end step, if Abyssinian Missionaries is equipped, transform it. The backside is Lunarkan Inquisitors. Lunarkan Inquisitors are a creature human cleric 4/4. When this creature transforms into Lunarkan Inquisitors, you may exile another target creature until Lunarkan Inquisitors leaves the battlefield. So it's the Fiend Hunter clause, or the Banishing Priest clause, or whatever clause you want to call that, Oblivion Ring, etc. It is the fixed version, of course. They're never going back to Fiend Hunter or Oblivion Ring, where you could do some shenanigans to make it permanent. You can't make this permanent. But yeah, it's a 4/4 that flips and exiles something as long as it lives. So Fiend Hunter was amazing, as was Banishing Priest and whatnot, totally first pickable. Its cost was considerably less, though. It was 1 white. This is 3 and a white, so it's just 1 more mana. But you also have to draft a playable piece of equipment, play that piece of equipment, draw that piece of equipment, cast that piece of equipment, and equip it after you've cast Abyssinian Missionaries. That's a lot. That's a lot of work, and I just don't see this happening consistently enough to be worth it. There are an okay number of equipments that I wouldn't be too upset playing, and arguably a couple of playable ones. But in order to get them, play them, draw them, cast them at the same time as this, or while it's on the battlefield, just seems like so much work. This is really clunky. I've got to go with a C+ on it. A 3/3 for 4 is okay, and it does have upside if you can try to pull it off. C+ if you have, 1 piece of equipment. If you have no equipment, it's more of a C or C-. If you have a couple pieces of equipment, it may go as high as a B, but I just don't see it happening reliably enough for the Abyssinian Missionaries to be there. I really have to see how this shapes out. I could see myself being wrong on this. Maybe equipment is just totally playable, like it kind of was in Innistrad. There was some definite pieces of playable equipment in the original one, but I'll keep an eye on this one. I'm going to go kind of C- to B+. It's got the biggest range. I'll average it out to a C+ though. Next up, we have Bound by Moonsilver. Bound by Moonsilver is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. It says enchanted creature can't attack, block, or transform. Sacrifice another permanent. Attach Bound by Moonsilver to target creature. Activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery and only once each turn. So this is solid. It's kind of an arrest. It doesn't stop activated abilities, but it does stop transformations, which is pretty solid. 2 and a white for pacifism is still totally justifiable. This should be a pretty high pick, and every white deck wants to play as many of these as they can get. The ability to move it around a little bit later by sacrificing a land or a clue token or a 1/1 human you don't care about anymore is quite nice as well. So that 3/3 that looked pretty dangerous on turn 4 can be let go, and it can now go on to that scary 5/5 flyer. And yeah, totally fine. Totally, I think, first pickable in a number of packs. There's obviously going to be a number of rares that you should take over this. You would never take this over Avastin, but I think it will be first pickable in some packs, and I think it's just solid removal. So I've got to go B+ on this. I think it's fantastic. Next up, we have Bygone Bishop. Bygone Bishop is 2 and a white for a creature spirit cleric at rare. It's a 2/3. It's got flying. And whenever you cast a creature spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, you investigate. Investigate is a new mechanic in Shadows over Innistrad. Investigate says put a colorless clue artifact token onto the battlefield with 2. Sacrifice this artifact. Draw a card. So you pay 2 generic mana and you sack the clue and you draw a card. It's card draw for later in the game. Kind of cool. Investigate is nifty. It's a nice little bit of card advantage. So this is a 3 mana, 2/3 flyer for 3. That's pretty normally costed. 2/3 flyer for 3, pretty normal. We sometimes pay 4, we sometimes pay 3. Fairly normal. So the fact that every creature that follows this, and a large number, will follow a 3-drop ideally. You'll play this on turn 3, and then hopefully play a number of other creatures throughout the course of the game. So for each one that you play, you get a clue, is pretty nice, actually. This will help fuel your later game. It's a lot less impactful in the later game if you do end up playing this on turn 7, 8, 9, etc. When you're playing less creatures or more expensive creatures than 3 CMC. Yeah, so, you don't, I think I actually said you get a creature for every or a clue for every creature. You get for everyone that's 3 or less, but still that's going to be a decent number of your cards. You generally play a lot of 2-drops in draft and a fair number of 3-drops. But yeah, I think this is solid. I think it's totally fine, and it's a 2/3 flyer, which is going to be decent. I think it's a solid first pick, and I think it's playable in every white deck. I don't think it's bomby by any way, shape, or form, and I think you might actually take Bound by Moonsilver over this. I think it's a B, though. I think it's just a totally solid, totally fine card to first pick. It's not amazing, it's not bomby, it's not going to win you the game, but it's going to help get you there, so B. Next up, we have Cathars Companion. Cathars Companion is 2 and a white for a creature hound at common. It's a 3/1, and whenever you cast a non-creature spell, Cathars Companion gains indestructible until end of turn. So it's a 3/1 for 3. That's not the stats that I super like. I like 3/1s for 2, and we'll see one a little bit later. But 3/1 for 3 that a couple times gains indestructible is fine. It's not all that great, though. As I said, I love 3/1s for 2, but for 3 is asking a little bit much. Seems like total filler. Replace it if you can. Don't feel too bad if you do have to main deck it, if it's kind of your 23rd creature or you need to up your creature count. Don't feel too bad, but it will die pretty handily on turn 4 and later when this actually starts to get into combat. So middle of the road C for me. No higher, no lower. Middle of the road C. Next up, we have Chaplains Blessing. Chaplains Blessing is a single white mana for a sorcery at common. It says you gain 5 life. I say avoid this. Avoid this. Pure life gain is so rarely worth it. If this was a single white gain 15 life, I might play it. Maybe. But 5 life, absolutely not. You can side this in if you really need to buy yourself some time against a super aggressive deck, if you find out that you're really not the beatdown. But otherwise, this just isn't worth the card. It doesn't affect the board. It just buys you time, and it buys you probably a turn if you're actually behind and that 5 life is important. So leave this in the sideboard and still rarely side it in. So D- for me. Chaplain's Blessing, D-. Next up, we have Dauntless Cathar. Dauntless Cathar is 2 and a white for a creature human soldier at common. She is a 3/2, and she has an ability that a few cards have. Pay 1 and a white, exile Dauntless Cathar from your graveyard. Put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. Activate this ability only any time you could cast a sorcery. We've already seen that on Bounded by Moonsilver, and we're going to see it a few more times. These effects that can only be done at sorcery speed, which definitely hurts them. It definitely hurts them. A 3 mana 3/2 is okay. It's not great, but it's okay. Getting a spirit out of it later in the game is a nice effect, but it would be awesome if it was instant speed. If I could do this end of their turn, this would be way better. But it's still kind of okay. It's nowhere near as good as Doom Traveler was back from the original Innistrad, but it's not the worst. I would probably main deck one of these most of the time, and I wouldn't go out of my way to pick them up too heavily, but I would main deck the first one, maybe even the second one. I wouldn't feel too upset about the second one. I think it's totally fine. I think it's got a decent enough upside. It's decently enough costed that I can give this a C+. I wouldn't cut these too regularly, but I would if I had better creatures. So C+ for me. Next up, we have Declaration in Stone. Declaration in Stone is 1 and a white for a sorcery at rare. Exile target creature and all other creatures its controller controls with the same name as that creature. That player investigates for each non-token creature exiled this way. Yeah, so this is pretty solid removal. This is, you won't be able to hit a ton of things off this like you can in Constructed. You're going to get one creature out of this, but it is still 1 white exile target creature. Their big bomb Avastin, exile it, just gone. Super solid removal. You might be able to get some good effect out of this. If somebody is really going off with spirits tokens or human tokens, you might actually be able to get them on that and blow up a number of creatures. But I think this really should be used more for bomb removal and serious threat removal. Now, they do get clue tokens, but I don't care. I don't care at all. Them getting a random card for the price of 2 mana is way worse than them losing their best creature or one of their serious threats that's going to win them the game. I don't care in the slightest that they get a clue token after I kill their bomb. I would give them 4 clue tokens if I could kill their bomb for 1 white mana. This just seems totally first pickable, absolutely premium removal. I've got to go with probably an A- on it just because it's not instant speed. If it was instant, it would be A or A+, but A- for me. Next up, we have Descend Upon the Sinful, which in French they mistranslated, and it's Descende something la pichou or something like that. Anyways, it translates to Descend Upon the Fisherman in French, as opposed to sinners. Pretty hilarious. Anyways, it's 4 white for a sorcery at Mythic. It says Exile all creatures. Delirium. Put a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying onto the battlefield if you have Delirium. So it's a board sweeper. A 6 mana board wipe is a little bit pricey. We're a long ways from 2 white. 6 mana pricey. Still, if you can get the angel, it seems worth it because then you wipe the board and you get an angel out of it. And you don't turn on their Delirium or anything because you exile the cards. But I still think this really hinges on the reliability of Delirium. If it's on regularly and you can reliably build for it, then this seems decent and potentially even a finisher. If it's not reliable, like I'm thinking it's going to be, then this is just an overcosted Wrath, which makes it a fair bit worse. Still okay, and you can still definitely build the right deck for a Wrath. You know, the deck that kind of goes walls up, draws some cards, lets you overcommit, Wraths the board, and then takes over, which is a viable draft format, or a viable draft archetype, viable draft deck. So I think I'm going to go with a B- on this, ultimately. And that is based on the potential of you getting that angel. If you really cannot reliably get the angel, I think I would drop it a half step, but I'll go with a B- to start. Next up, we have Devilthorn Fox. Devilthorn Fox is a 1 and a white creature fox at common for a 3/1 that just has flavor text. Absolutely vanilla 3/1 for 2, which is stats that I love. 3/1 for 2 in white specifically is arguably my favorite stats cost ratio. I love it. I love it so much. It's so aggressive. People undervalue them, and then they just go, oh, wow, I'm taking 3 damage on turn 3, and another 3 on turn 4 if I stumble in any way, shape, or form. It's for hyper-aggressive decks. In the right white deck, it's just a total house. Don't overload on them. You know, I might play 2. I would never play more, and 1 is probably my general limit. They get way worse as the game goes on as well if you haven't kept the board clear, but the slightest stumble from your opponent, and you are putting the game away with a 3/1 for 2. Solid mid-pack pickup. I would never first pick it, but I would take it pick 4 or 5 if I'm already kind of going down white. And pack 2 and pack 3, I'm going to pick them relatively highly. Solid pick for me. Always going to main deck the first one. C+. Next up, we've got Drogskull Cavalry. Drogskull Cavalry is 5 white for a creature spirit knight at rare. It's a 4/4 flyer. Whenever another spirit enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 2 life. Pay 3 and a white. Put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. I like the ability. Pumping out spirits and gain 2 life a pop for 4 mana is not the worst deal ever. Not the worst deal at all, in fact. It's a pretty decent deal. A 4/4 flyer is nice enough, but 7 mana? Oh, probably main deckable and sealed, but I'm not too sure about this in draft. I was complaining about that 8-drop angel. 7 drops are also asking an awful lot. They need to end the game basically immediately, just like your 8 drops, and this doesn't do that. This does not do that. This gives you some level of inevitability as you start pumping out an army of 1/1 flyers, but it gives your opponent time. It gives your opponent a lot of time. So I don't know about this. I don't think I want to first pick it too often. I will play it in sealed probably every single time, and I might take it if I'm going a little bit less aggressive, probably in pack 2 or pack 3. But I've got to go with a B- on this. I think it's just too expensive to be truly a bomby first pick rare. But I think it's okay in sealed and okay if you're in a slower deck. So B-. Next up, we have Eerie Interlude. Eerie Interlude is 2 and a white for an instant at rare. Exile any number of target creatures you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is interesting. You likely won't ever live the dream of Eerie Interlude, which is, of course, playing Eerie Interlude, exiling all of your team, and then playing Descend Upon the Sinful and wrathing just your opponent's board. That would take a lot of mana and a lot of luck. Probably won't ever happen. But if you do, well done. I want to see that happen. If you do that, tell me about it. More ideally, you're going to use this to stack a bunch of enter the battlefield effects triggers. You're going to use it to block and then exile so that you don't lose anything, although you also don't trade anything, which probably isn't the best of ideas. But yeah, if you can really build around this, if you can build the enter the battlefield effects, take everything that puts down a spirit when it enters the battlefield, take everything that does damage when it enters the battlefield, etc., then I think you can do some stuff with this. I think it is fairly cute, though. I think it needs to be pack one, pick one, and then have the draft go well to really kind of do that. I'd love to see it done. I'd love to do it, but I'm not confident enough that it's actually going to happen. On average, I think this is really just kind of a fog some of the times. If you can do the end of the battlefield effects, cool, but I would be very careful. This needs to go in a very well-crafted deck. So, C+ for me. Next up, we have Emissary of the Sleepless. This is 4 and a white for a creature spirit at common. It's a 2/4 flyer, and when Emissary of the Sleepless enters the battlefield, if a creature died this turn, put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. A 2/4 flyer for 5 is a fair bit. We were playing Cliffhaven Vampires, 2/4s for 4. We were playing Vampire Envoys, 1/4s for 3. A 2/4 for 5 is a lot. If you can get a spirit out of it, cool, I guess. But it just seems overcosted and ultimately underpowered. Maybe it has a home in the blue-white spirits deck, but for 5, I want my flyers to be 3 power or higher. I want Ghostly Sentinels. I want things like that. This just seems a bit too weak. I'll probably avoid this a little bit more often than not and cut it a little bit more often than not. So C- for me for Emissary of the Sleepless. Next up, we have Ethereal Guidance. Ethereal Guidance is a sorcery at common. Creatures you control get +2/+2 until end of turn. Good old War Flare or Rush of Battle or whatever effect you want to call it. We got 3 of them in the 3 sets of cons, and they all did different little things to them. This one does nothing. This one just gives you the +2/+1, and it's sorcery speed. No thanks. This effect is generally only okay at instant speed, or if like a Rush of Battle, it's giving the majority of your team lifelink as well. Then it's okay. Now, if you're in a massively aggressive deck, you don't really care that you have to do this before combat and telegraph it. You don't really care because you're attacking in with, 7 1/1 humans that are now suddenly 3/2 humans and finishing the game. You don't care. Outside of those massively hyper-aggressive decks, this becomes a lot less good since it's not a trick. As well, people are going to cast this as a trick. If somebody goes attack and you go, okay, block, 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 and they go, haha, Ethereal Guidance, you need to say no. That's a sorcery. Generally, I think you should cut this pretty liberally if you're not in that very specific, massively aggressive deck. So I've got to go with a C-. Next up, we have Expose Evil. Expose Evil is 1 and a white for an instant at common. Tap up to 2 target creatures, and then investigate. This is kind of something to buy time. This is fine enough. It's decent in an aggressive deck that's looking to just continue to get through. So, turn 2, I get in with my 2/2. Turn 3, I get in with my... I guess I wouldn't generally have a 2/2 on turn 2, but you know what I mean. You're getting in for damage, and then they start to put creatures down. You go, tap them, continue getting in. That's a viable strategy. It can also buy you a little bit of time if you're being slightly controlly. This can be a tempo play. The clue's cool. It's basically free bonus that later in the game will be fine. Ultimately, it's not that great. Freezing would have been better, so tapping it and they don't untapped. But yeah, this is fine enough. It's instant, so it can be done during their beginning of combat step, but I think you're generally going to cut this unless you're in that hyper-aggressive deck or that hyper-tempo deck, so C- for me. Next up, we have Griffs Boon. Griffs Boon is a single white mana for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and has flying. For 3 and a white, you can return Griffs Boon from your graveyard to the battlefield attached to target creature, and of course, activate this ability only anytime you could cast a sorcery. So a single white mana for +1/+0 and a flyer. That's tempting. It is really low cost. This doesn't quite hit the power level, though, that I want for a playable aura. Auras really need to be really good to be playable in my books. Getting it back if they kill the creature is nice, and it really helps blunt the downside of auras that they generally have. Ultimately, this is a little bit better than it would normally be without that return to the battlefield effect, and without it being a single white mana. I'm so tempted by this. I'm tempted. I still don't think it's very good. I'm going to go with a C. I'm going to trust my gut and go with a C, although my gut generally wants to say C- or D. But I'm going to go with a C, and I'm going to keep my eye on it. I'm going to keep my eye on it to see if it actually is good with the fact that you can recur it. But keep an eye on this one. C to start. I could see it going up to C+. I could see it being more realistically lower, but C to start. Next up, let's go back to a double-faced card. We've got Hanweir Militia Captain. This is 1 and a white for a creature human soldier at rare. It's a 2/2, and it says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 4 or more creatures, not other, so it counts their other herself, I think, transform Hanweir Militia Captain. On the transform side, we have Westvale Cult Leader. So she has amassed a group of people and then said, hey, let's join a cult or form a cult. Creature human cleric at rare for a star. Westvale Cult Leader's power and toughness are each equal to the number of creatures you control. And at the beginning of your end step, put a 1/1 white and black human cleric creature token onto the battlefield. So she's a 1/1 at a minimum if for some reason all those creatures died when she transformed. But probably she's going to be a 4/4 at a minimum. And then every step, she's going to make herself bigger. This thing is going to be really, really, really fun in a human or spirits token deck because she doesn't have to have humans. She apparently can bring spirits along to her cult. If you can reliably make tokens, this thing's going to flip and become huge. In addition to that, it's just a bear. It's a 2/2 for 2 with absolute pure upside, which means it's a C+ at a minimum. Getting those 3 creatures in addition should be generally something you can do if you build for it with tokens. And it'll break board stalls pretty nicely by getting those tokens and also making it just bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, I want to see the token deck that this just goes off in. I think first picking it and going towards that deck is a decent idea, and I'm excited to play with this. Ultimately, we'll have to see how it ends up, but I'm pretty confident giving this a B. I really, 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 really do like it. So B for Hanweir Militia Captain / Westvale Cult Leader. Next up, we have Hope Against Hope. Hope Against Hope is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 for each creature you control. As long as enchanted creature is a human, it has first strike. So yeah, if you can put together, just like with Hanweir Militia Captain, a dedicated tokens deck, this might be okay, because just like Hanweir, or the flip side, Westvale Cult Leader, it's going to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Ultimately, I think this needs to be +3/+3 at a minimum to be worth it. It's always +1/+1 because it does count itself, the creature that it's attached to. But I think you need to reliably make this aura give something +3/+3 to really be worth it. It also really opens you up to a total combat blowout, where they kill something mid-combat, and then suddenly this creature's weaker, and then it dies, and you've lost an aura. It just opens yourself up for huge blowouts. I think I'm going to avoid this until I kind of see differently, or until I see that the token deck is something you can do reliably, and this is a part of it. I don't even think it's a part of it if you can do it reliably. I think the Militia Captain and other things are a better choice, so C- for me. Next up, we have Humble the Brute. Humble the Brute is 4 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Investigate. So this is kind of like Smite the Monstrous. Smite the Monstrous for 1 more mana, and you get a clue token out of it, is asking a little bit of us. Smite the Monstrous was generally not something you wanted to main deck, although you could. I would never fault anybody for main decking Smite the Monstrous, but it's generally best to leave it in the sideboard. Creatures are also generally a little bit smaller in this set than they were in the last sets, where Smite the Monstrous was, Battle for Zendikar. Still, it's a good answer to bombs. 5 mana is a fair bit, though, as well. I think you generally do want to keep this in the sideboard, though. I wouldn't disagree with mainboarding it sometimes, but I do think you want to leave this in the sideboard, see that, they do have a really good target for it, and I don't have a way of answering it, sideboard it in. Otherwise, I think you're going to be stuck with a 5-drop instant that doesn't do anything for a little bit too much. So I've got to go with a C- on this. Maybe even a D+ is the right rating there for a card that I'm generally going to sideboard. So D+, C-. Next up, we have Inquisitor's Ox. Every set has to have an Ox. We haven't had one for a few sets. The Inquisitor's Ox is 3 and a white for a creature Ox at common. It's a 2/5, and it's got Delirium. That Ox is really messed up. Inquisitor's Ox gets +1/+0 and has vigilance as long as you have delirium. I don't know. Well, I guess it kind of has mad cow disease, right? It's kind of the mad cow. Yeah, so it's a 2/5 for 4 that maybe becomes a 3/5. Yeah, totally replaceable. Maybe a sideboard consideration if you find out you're not the beatdown, but I don't think you generally want to main deck this all this often. You don't want to go out of your way. You should be able to get this, pick 13 or whatever in a pack, I think. So C- for me, totally replaceable, not really main deckable. Next up, we have Inspiring Captain. Inspiring Captain is 3 and a white for a creature human knight at common. It's a 3/3. When Inspiring Captain enters the battlefield, creatures you control get +1/+1 until end of turn. So it's a 4/4 for 3, which is okay. It's not the worst, it's not the best. It could be an okay finisher in a really speedy White Weenies deck. So by the time this comes down, you've already got yourself 3 or 4 creatures, and suddenly they're all a little bit bigger. And you're only paying 1 extra mana for a 1-turn Anthem from this being a vanilla 3/3 for 3. It's not a high pick, and I think you might even cut this sometimes, but otherwise it's just totally fine. That ability is going to be cool sometimes, other times it's just not going to work, but you're going to be left with a 3/3, which isn't the worst for 4 mana, so kind of middle of the road C from me. Next up, we have Militant Inquisitor. Militant Inquisitor is a 2 and a white creature human cleric at common. It's a 2/3. Militant Inquisitor gets +1/+0 for each equipment you control. Meh. There's only a couple somewhat playable equipments in this set, and we'll get to that on Wednesday, probably when we do artifacts. So I don't think this is often going to be any better than a 3/3. Generally, it will just be a 2/3. I would avoid this and replace it almost always unless you had more than a couple of equipments, which I don't think most decks should really have. This kind of falls under the same problem as Abyssinian Missionaries does. While there are some playable-ish equipments, you have to get them, you have to play them, you have to draw them at the same time as this. There's too much going on for that to reliably happen. So I think you should look at this as a 2/3 for 3, which is just generally cuttable. So C- for me. Next up, we have Moreland Drifter. Moreland Drifter is 1 and a white for a 2/2 creature spirit at common. It has delirium. As long as you have delirium, it has flying. So it's a 2/2 conditional flyer. It's a bear. So it is a bear with total upside, which makes it a C+. It's not that great of an upside because I am so iffy about delirium being on all that commonly, but it is still just a 2/2 for 2, which is totally and utterly playable. So I've got to go with a C+ on it. It's kind of the definition of a C+. It's a bear with an upside. Maybe like a C+-, so like half a plus, whatever half a plus would be. Because, yeah, I'm iffy about delirium, but slightly better than a C, so we'll say C+, because I don't have any sort of half-plus grades. Nahiri's Machinations. Nahiri's Machinations is 1 and a white for an enchantment at uncommon. At the beginning of combat on your turn, target creature you control gains indestructible until end of turn. Pay 1 and a red. Nahiri's Machinations deals 1 damage to target blocking creature. I've seen people say, this is insane, this is so good. I don't think so. You have to take off turn 2 and spend a card. And then you kind of get a free attack each turn. Because even if your 1/1's indestructible, you can attack with it. It'll probably just bounce off something, but it'll live, so you could have sort of a free attack. Assuming you're red-white, you get to really screw with combat math, which I like. I do want to see how this plays out, but like many of the enchantments, it feels a little bit too slow, a little bit too clunky to really get there. To really, really get there. I think most decks would just prefer to have a 2/2 for 2 than to have this thing going on. I think you have to be in red-white to play this. And I think even then it's not necessarily the best thing to do. If you could deal the damage to attacking creatures, sure, I might actually play this way more readily. But only being able to hit blocking creatures, I'm out on this. I'm going to cut it more often than not. I've got to go with a C- on it. But I am going to keep an eye on it. Next up, we have Nearheath Chaplain. I'm going to say Captain so many times. Nearheath Chaplain is 3 and a white for a creature human cleric at uncommon. It's a 3/1. It's got lifelink. And for 2 and a white, exile Nearheath Chaplain from your graveyard. Put 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. Activate this ability only any time you could cast a sorcery. So you know how I said I love 3/1s for 2 and 3/1s for 3 are a little bit more iffy? Well, this is a 3/1 for 4, but it does have lifelink, which is pretty great. This makes your opponent really want to kill this. They might even waste removal on it. It's not the worst to have a 3/1 lifelink for 4. But it is a little bit better if you have some kind of support. If you can throw some counters on this, if you can buff it up with some other static ability, with an anthem like Always Watching or something like that. But you'll still gain some life, and you'll probably get a trade out of it at least. And then later in the game, you get 2/1/1 spirits, which is not something to scoff at. All around, I think this is totally solid, totally playable, not first pickable by any way, shape, or form. But yeah, I think it's always main deckable, so I've got to go with a C+ on this. I could maybe even see it being a B-, but we'll go with C+ for now. Next up, we have Not Forgotten. Not Forgotten is a 1 and a white sorcery at uncommon. Put target card from a graveyard onto the top or bottom of its owner's library. Put a 1/1 white spirit creature token with flying onto the battlefield. I respect the versatility of this card, but I don't think it's good. It has a ton of usage. You can turn off reanimation shenanigans. There's zombies coming back, no more. We exiled it. Or we didn't exile it, we put it on the bottom of their library. You can turn off Delirium. Oh, you have enchantment. You have an enchantment in your graveyard. The one enchantment you're playing, so Delirium is on. Well, now it's on the bottom of your graveyard, or bottom of your library. I'll get the terms right at some point. Or you could very, very slowly regrowth yourself. Rather than drawing the card, you put it on top of your library. And you get a spirit for doing all this. I don't think any of those conditions are really worth playing this card, spending the mana, spending part of the turn, or maybe an entire turn, especially with it not being instant. If it was instant speed and I could put it on top of my library and then draw it immediately, maybe. But it's sorcery speed and just getting a spirit out of it, I'm pretty out on this card. I'm going to leave it in the sideboard until I learn better. I'm going to go with a D. Next up, we have Odric, Lunark Marshal. Odric is a 3 and a white legendary creature human soldier at rare. He's a 3/3. And at the beginning of each combat, creatures you control gain first strike until end of turn if a creature you control has first strike. The same is true for Flying, Death Touch, Double Strike, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Reach, Skulk, Trample, and Vigilance. We'll talk about Skulk a little bit later. Note, Prowess is not on here. It's basically every evergreen mechanic except for Prowess plus Skulk, which is not yet evergreen, but almost definitely will be. And we'll talk about Skulk later. So yeah, this guy's cool. I love Odric. Love Odric so much. He gets better the earlier you take him. If you take him pack 1, and then you take all the first strikers and lifelinkers and indestructibles, although there's not many of those, and vigilances and etc., and then all of your creatures are sharing all of their French vanilla abilities, this thing just gets crazy. It's much less good pack 3 pick 1, or pack 3 pick 5, when you've only got maybe one first striker. But pack 1 pick 1, this should be taken and played and built around like crazy. I can't wait to give that a go. As well, a 3/3 for 4 is totally fine. You know, even if you're not getting those abilities, you're not upset playing this for what it is. As I said, pack 3, it might be a little bit worse, but still, this is just super bomby and can wreck opponents. I'm never passing Odric. I'm taking it first pick every single time. Total bomb to me. I've got to go with a solid A on it. Next up, we have Open the Armory. Open the Armory is 1 and a white for a sorcery at uncommon. Search your library for an aura or equipment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Big whoop. Really for constructed only, I think. It works a little bit with Bound by Moonsliver. I wouldn't mind going and getting my Bound by Moonsliver so I could remove something from the game. Maybe the Geist of St. Traft aura that we'll talk about next week. But still, I don't think this is worth a card slot in your deck. The equipment's just not good enough. The auras just aren't good enough. It's not worth wasting a slot on this. If it was instant, I still wouldn't play it. So I've got to go with an F on this. I think you should just pass it every single time. Next up, we have Paranoid Perish Blade. 2 and a white for a creature human soldier at uncommon. It's a 3/2. It's got Delirium. Paranoid Perish Blade gets +1/+0 and has first strike as long as there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard. I said I wasn't going to read that, but I was on a roll. So yeah, it's got +1/+0 and first strike if you have Delirium. It's a 3/2 for 3, which is totally fine. You know, total pass. You can go in your deck if you want to. It can be taken out of your deck if you don't want it. It's playable if you need a creature. 4/2 first strike, a little bit better, but still not that great. Delirium is not something I expect to be consistent. We all know this. I will say this so many times this week. I would love to be proven wrong. And there are some cards that I can see turning Delirium on really fast. We'll talk about one tomorrow, actually. But I'm just not sure how reliable it's going to be. So I'm out on this as more than anything other than just pure filler. I'm assuming this is a 3/2 for 3 a huge amount of the time, so it's a middle-of-the-road C. Next up, we have Pius Evangel. Pius Evangel is 2 and a white for a creature human cleric at uncommon. It's a 2/2. Whenever Pius Evangel or another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain a life. So it's a one-sided Soul Sister. Soul Warden, I think it is. Pay 2 generic mana, tap it, sacrifice another permanent, so creature, land, clue token, whatever, transform Pius Evangel. Pius Evangel then becomes a Wayward Disciple. Wayward Disciple is a creature human cleric. It's a 2/4, and whenever Wayward Disciple or another creature you control dies, target opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. It's a Blood Artist from Dark Ascension? Innistrad? I don't remember where Blood Artist was exactly. Anyways, Pius Evangel looks pretty fun. I like this guy a lot. I think he'll enable some cool decks. I think there are some cool decks to build in Innistrad beyond blue-white flyers, black-white this, red-black that. I think there are some cool decks out there, just like the original Innistrad. So you can gain some incremental life early on for a slightly overcosted bear, a 3-mana 2/2. And then when the time is right, which may be when you get a cool leaves the battlefield trigger, or something is going to die anyways, or you want to just flip him for whatever reason, you sack something, flip him over, and then you start draining your opponent. It isn't bomby, but I think it's a vital engine part for some cool decks that could be out there. So I think it should be a relatively high deck. I think this is a card that you take and then build a certain kind of deck. The sack deck, the sack and drain deck, the decks that Blood Artist kind of played in the original block. So I've got to go with B on this. I'm pretty happy to play this guy. I'm really excited to give him a go. Solid B. Next up, we have Puncturing Light. Puncturing Light is a 1 white instant. At common, destroy target attacking or blocking creature with power 3 or less. So Searing Light was fine. It wasn't great, but it was fine, hitting 2 powered for 1 mana attacking creatures or blocking creatures. Hitting 3 power for 2 mana seems much better, though. Totally nice early removal spell to stop some aggression or to get through some of your own because you can kill a blocker. Probably not a super high pick, but the first one I think is just totally fine and playable. Maybe even the second, but you might want to be a little bit careful with that. 3 power should kill an awful lot of things in the set. In fact, just at a quick glance, it kills all but 5 of the creatures that we've talked about so far, which is a large number of creatures. So this should kill an awful lot of things. So I've got to say this is pretty decent removal. Not first pickable, but relatively mid-pack picks, I think. And you'll always play the first one, I believe. So B- for me. Totally solid kind of early removal. Next up, we have Reaper of Flight Moonsilver. Reaper of Flight Moonsilver is 3 white for a creature angel at uncommon. It's a 3/3 flyer, and it has Delirium. Sacrifice another creature. Reaper of Flight Moonsilver gets +2/+1 until end of turn. Activate this ability only if you have Delirium. So you can't sack anything if you don't have Delirium already. So it's a 3/3 flyer for 5, which is okay. It's no Sarah Angel, it's no Avastin. It's not even a Ghostly Sentinel, which was also 5, but had Vigilance on it. Instead, we maybe get a chance to make this beefy. We maybe get a chance to make this a 5/4, or bigger, a 7/5, for example. And also to enable sack outlets. I do like that it's a +2/+1 is repeatable, and I do like that it's potentially a sack outlet for, to end the game in various ways, including just sacking your team and swinging in with, a 10 something. But this needs Delirium to be reliable enough for this to actually be playable. So we'll have to see how that ends up. This ranges from being okay to being pretty nice, depending on how reliable Delirium is to hit. I'm going to start with a C+ on it. It's going to go up if Delirium is possible, and if it's possible in white. I think Delirium might not be possible in all colors, but we'll have to take a look at that. That's something that I really need to play with the format to find out. But I'm going to start with a C+ on Reaper of Flight Moonsilver. Next up, we have Silver Strike. Silver Strike is 3 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Destroy target attacking creature. You gain 3 life. That's it. That's fine. Divine Verdict on defense only, basically. Divine Verdict was 3 and a white, but it blew up an attacking or blocking creature. You gain 3 life instead of losing the ability to blow up a blocker. I've seen worse. The 4 mana does hurt a little bit. It's not premium removal, but it's still solid enough to be picked relatively highly. Immolating Glare was decent because it was 2 mana. So this isn't as good as that. Leaving up 4 mana is a pretty big tell. Don't attack into 4 mana against white unless you're really sure they don't have this or you don't care about what you're attacking with. But yeah, I think it's fine. You'll probably play the first one. So C+. Next up, we have Spectral Shepherd. Spectral Shepherd is 2 and a white for a creature spirit at uncommon. It's a 2/2, it's a flyer, and for 1 and a blue, you can return target spirit you control to its owner's hand. So you can bounce Spectral Shepherd back, you can bounce some other spirit back. I think that's pretty cool. A 2/2 flyer for 3 is totally fine and justified. It's playable as a filler in Flyers decks, or really any deck. Dodging removal and helping all your other spirits dodge removal is totally solid. Your opponent basically cannot kill a spirit if you have 1 and a blue up, and you have this, which is nice. In the blue-white spirits deck, I think this is going to be pretty darn solid. It's better than the spirits decks for sure, but I think it's still totally playable on its own as well. It's a 2/2 flyer that, as long as you have the mana, is not going to die. It is just not going to die. So I think I would take these pretty happily, and I would main deck the first one for sure, and I would main deck all of them that I have in a blue-white spirits deck, I believe. So C+ for me. It goes up a little bit more if you are in spirits. Next up, we have Stern Constable. Stern Constable is a single white mana for a creature human soldier at common. It's a 1/1. Tap it and discard a card to tap target creature. As a tapper, this is pricey. Discarding an entire card is a lot of equity to give up just to tap something for the briefest of turns. Now, there's an ability that we'll talk about tomorrow called Madness. And that's where this maybe comes into effect. I don't want to go too much into Madness today. Like Delirium, I have concerns about Madness in this set, and it has to do with how much the discard outlets cost. Specifically mana-wise. This one costs nothing mana-wise. You just have to tap the creature, which is good. So this may have a place in Madness decks, but the problem, of course, is that white doesn't have any Madness cards. So you're going to have to play white to get this free discard outlet, but that means you're going to be playing less Madness. Blah, I don't know. Looking at this as a tapper, though, I just don't think it's any good at all. It's a 1/1 for 1, and the tap ability is so costly. Discarding an entire card just to tap something is so costly. I don't think I want to touch this thing. I don't really want it for Madness because I think you're just playing a color that has no Madness to play this thing. And I don't want it as a tapper. I'm just so totally out on Stern Constable. I've got to go with an F on it. Total F. Next up, we have Strength of Arms. Strength of Arms is a single white mana for an instant at common. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If you control an equipment, put a 1/1 white human soldier creature token onto the battlefield. This is a cool enough trick. It's fine enough if you need a 23rd card. I'd still probably avoid it if I wasn't desperate. It's similar to Mighty Leap AL. +2/+2 will probably save your creature. Maybe it gets in a little bit of extra damage, but unless you're killing your opponent with that 2 damage, you probably don't want to use it. If you have an equipment, you get a human. That's cool, I guess. Really, this is just kind of the, hey, I need a 23rd card kind of thing. So C-. Cut this if you don't need a 23rd card. If you do, don't feel too bad playing it. Next up, we have Survive the Night. Survive the Night is 2 and a white for an instant at common. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Investigate. This is also a fine combat trick, although it's slightly expensive, being 3 mana. God's Willing, Feet of Resistance, Lithomancer's Focus, those all vaguely did the same thing, but they were all like 1 mana or 2 mana. 3 mana is a lot to ask. It's asking way too much just to get a clue token out of it. I think this should stay on the board way more often than not. I'll cut this pretty regularly. I would play Strength of Arms before I would play this as my 23rd card. This is more a 24th card, I think. So I'll go with a C- on it. Next up, we have Tenacity. Another card in the list of, wow, that's not the name of a card yet. 3 and a white for an instant at uncommon. Creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain lifelink until end of turn. Untap those creatures. This is kind of cool, actually. This is a pretty solid combat trick. 4 mana's a lot. It's really telegraphed. You're really telegraphing if you're attacking with this, and there's some slightly unfavorable things going on, and you've got 4 mana up. Your opponent knows what's going to happen, and be very careful attacking into that said situation. But on tapping the team, antheming them would be the verb of that word. That is never really a verb. And giving them lifelink, that's a huge swing. That's a huge swing. I think this is going to be playable a little bit more than most combat tricks are. And generally, you want this more in an aggro deck. The most controlling of white decks maybe doesn't want this. But in an aggro deck, this is just going to be insane. Seems fine. I'd main deck it here and there. middle of the road C, I think, just because it does fall off on those decks that aren't going to go wide. But in those wide decks, boy, this is pretty darn solid. So middle of the road C, slightly better in the right deck. Next up, we have Talias Lieutenant. Talias Lieutenant is 1 and a white for a creature human soldier at rare. It's a 1/1, and when Talias Lieutenant enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other human you control. When another human enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Talias Lieutenant. Though being Canadian, I guess I should be saying Lieutenant instead. Yeah, this is a 1/1 for 2. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? Well, this is a throwback to something called Champion of the Parish, which is very solid. Champion of the Parish was a 1/1 for 1 that had the second ability of Talias Lieutenant. It got a counter every time you put down a human. And it went crazy. It went huge because Human Tribal was a deck in Innistrad, and I'm certain it's a deck in Shadows over Innistrad. So this, if you play it on turn 2, yes, it's a 1/1, but it will very rapidly become a 2/2, 3/3, 4/4. If you're producing tokens, this thing goes insane. The benefit that this has over Champion of the Parish is Champion of the Parish sucked on turn 8. Top decking a Champion of the Parish was worthless. Playing a 1/1 for 1 on turn 8 that's never going to get bigger, maybe it becomes a 2/2, is bad. This, if you top deck it on turn 8 and you have 3 or 4 humans down, all of your humans get bigger. This thing is really solid. I really like it. I love that it plays so well in the early game as well as the late game. Really like it. It's not quite bomb territory because it is just a 1/1. And for insane things to happen, you do require a fairly specific scenario, but I think it's a fantastic utility creature. It needs to be answered early. It's going to do big things if it comes down late. Total build around, totally fits into the Human Tribal deck, which I think is going to be good with or without this card, but I think this will be kind of the feather in your cap if you are in that deck. I've got to go with a B+ on Talias Lieutenant. I really like it. Next up, we have Thraben Inspector. Thraben Inspector is a single white mana for a creature human soldier at common. It's a 1/2, and when it enters the battlefield, investigate. Clues just don't seem worth playing a 1-mana 1/2 to me. I like clues. I like drawing cards. I like the cards that are good and have investigate tacked onto them, but this is not a good card. This is a bad card. Prophet of Distortion was fine, but I got to draw as many cards as I could pay for and wanted. And not just one time. And it still wasn't great. It was just okay. I don't think this is something I ever want to play. I'll probably even feel a little bit bad if I have to play it. I've got to go with just an F on it. I think it's just so far below what you want to be playing that you just should never touch it. So F for Thraben Inspector. Next up, we have Topplegeist. Topplegeist is a single white mana for a creature spirit at uncommon. It's a 1/1, it has flying, and when Topplegeist enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. Alright. It has Delirium, though. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, tap target creature that player controls. I have to shorten that. I just get into a roll reading the cards out. Yeah, so it's a 1/1 for 1, flyer. No. Just no. It taps a creature. That's cool. You know, that's all right, but that's just a single turn. Otherwise, it's just a 1/1 for 1, and we do not play 1/1s for 1. We do not play Kite Sail Scouts. We do not play whatever else they've been called throughout history. If you have Delirium, it becomes a little bit better. It taps something every single turn. That's significantly better. Not every single turn, every single opponent's turn. That's pretty solid. I do like that. I just don't think it's going to be common enough to justify playing a 1/1 flyer. Topplegeist, I'm out on. Unless it's proven to me that Delirium is just something that you can turn on at the drop of a hat. If you can just say, of course I'm going to have Delirium on. If you can do it with a minimal amount of work, with a minimal detriment to your deck, this gets a lot better. But until I see that, I'm not a huge fan of Topplegeist. Not a huge fan. I'm going to go middle of the road C, because if that Delirium turns on, then oh boy, you're ready. But if it doesn't, you have such a terrible card sitting in your deck. So middle of the road C. I'll see how Delirium goes. Maybe it becomes a little bit higher. Maybe it shows up in my top 10 cards I was wrong about. Who knows? But C for now. Next up, we have Town Gossip Monger. Town Gossip Monger is also a 1/1 for 1. It's a creature human at uncommon, and it says tap an untapped creature you control, so it's got cohort, kind of. Transform Town Gossip Monger. It transforms into Incited Rabble, which is a creature human, 2/3. Incited Rabble attacks each combat if able. Pay 2 generic mana, Incited Rabble gets +1/+0 until end of turn. I love the story. I love the flavor of this. This jerk who's spreading gossip gets another creature riled up, and then suddenly you've got a rabble. You've got a mob running around and lighting stuff on fire. It's a 1/1 for 1, which is tough. But it'll pretty soon be a 2/3, but that 2/3 has to attack every single turn, and it has expensive fire breathing, which is just never good. I think this has to be in an aggressive deck. I think you have to play this turn 1, and then you have to play a 2-drop, and then at the end of their turn, you have to tap this and your 2-drop, transform it, and then start attacking. Any other sequencing, and I think this becomes pretty bad. Any other deck, and I think this becomes pretty bad. So I think I generally want to avoid this just because of the consistency issues. This is so terrible outside of that specific order of sequencing that I just don't think it's good enough to play. I might give this a try if I can really get that Weenies deck to go off, if I can really get the Humans deck to go off, etc. I might give it a try. So I am going to be a little bit generous and give it a C. I really wanted to go C-, but I'm going to go with a C on this for the potential of it fitting into various decks. But I'll keep an eye on it. C for now for Town Gossipmonger. All right, second last card for the white set review. We've got Unruly Mob. Unruly Mob is 1 and a white for a creature human at common. It's a 1/1, and it's back. It was in the original Innistrad. And I liked this card. It was pretty nifty. Whenever another creature you control dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Unruly Mob. So we don't like 1/1s for 1. Do we like 2/1s or 1/1s for 2? Not really, but this gets big pretty quick. And it has the bonus of being human, which is totally relevant, as I've talked about a million times so far in this set review. It's not an amazing card by any stretch, but it is surprisingly main deckable despite the stats to the cost. It works even better if you have some sack outlets, of course. This plus Pius Evangel plus a sack outlet, and you've got a deck. Boy, have you got a deck. Yeah, it's not first pickable, and it's not a high pick at all by any shape of the imagination, but it is a pick that you take, and you generally do main deck the first one, especially if humans are relevant to your deck, especially if creatures are going to die, especially if you're going to be playing a lot of them. So C+ for me. I'm a fairly big fan of Unruly Mob for what it is, so C+. All right, last card of the set review. We've got Vessel of Ephemera. Vessel of Ephemera is 1 and a white for an enchantment at common, and it's a cycle. There's vessels in all 5 colors. For 2 and a white and sacking Vessel of Ephemera, you can put 2 1/1 white spirit creature tokens with flying onto the battlefield. Blah. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. It's 5 mana for 2 1/1 flyers. That's terrible. That is terrible. Marshall Sutcliffe, in his official daily MTG Wizards of the Coast review, said, hey, this is okay. This is totally okay. Don't look at it as a 5 mana 2/2 flyer. It's an investment plan. I'm pretty sure that was because he had to be nice. He couldn't say the card was terrible in the official article. I think we'll hear a different rating when the actual set review comes out. And my rating is F. I don't like it. I do not like it at all. I want to be playing 2-drops, creatures on my turn 2. I don't want to be playing an enchantment that then on the next turn, if I also do nothing, I can get a couple of spirits out of, or way later on I can get a couple of spirits out of. I don't want to waste that 2-drop slot on something so ridiculously slow as this. Now, yes, this can enable Delirium. I think this is arguably the point of the Vessels, is to get an enchantment into your graveyard. But you need a playable enchantment. You don't want to play an enchantment that basically says, throw this away. Throw this away so you can maybe make some of your other cards better. That's not viable. We don't play Bonesaw to enable Surge. We don't play bad cards to enable Delirium, and I think this is a bad card. I've got to go with an F on it. There are Vessels that I'm a little bit higher on. I'm not F on all of them, but I am F on this one. I think it's too expensive for what it does. All right, that's going to wrap it up for the first Shadows over Innistrad set review. All of the white cards reviewed. Tomorrow we'll do blue, and then black, and then red, and then green, and then miscellaneous, which I still don't know if I'm going to split into 2. There's enough cards that I could viably do 2, so we'll see. But yeah, definitely let me know what you think of the set review. Let me know what you think of those cards. Let me know what your favorite white card is. I'm not even sure what, well, no, I know what my favorite is. My favorite is just flat out Avastin. But I am excited to try out Pius Evangel and Talias Lieutenant or Lieutenant, depending on your country of origin, I suppose. But yeah, I'm very excited about White. I'm very excited about Shadows over Innistrad in particular. As I said, it was the first set that I got into when I got back into Magic after my 12-year absence, and I'm super happy to be going back there. But definitely let me know what you think of the set review, the cards, etc. What's your favorite in the comments down below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find me on Twitter at The Mana Leak. That's L-E-E-K, like the vegetable, not the card. And you can also find me on Facebook at facebook.com/The Mana Leak. You've already found me here on YouTube. Please make use of that comment section. As I've always said, keep it civil, please. But make use of that. As well, spread my videos. Spread them to Reddit, to MTG Salvation, to whatever forums you use, Facebook groups, your local play groups, etc. Share the word of the Mana Leak with your friends, family, coworkers, etc. As well, if you like my videos, click that little thumbs up icon. That lets me know that you like the videos, makes me feel good. It also lets the world know that you like my videos and helps them rise up through the ranks. And if you haven't subscribed, you really should. You want to know when the rest of the set review videos go up, don't you? You want to know when we get back to the regular schedule the week after with Crack-a-Pack Tuesdays and Wacky Wednesdays and Spiky Saturdays and Top 10 Thursdays. And of course, I will be doing my pre-release recaps. I will be doing my over-the-shoulder first F&M draft of Shadows over Innistrad on this channel. All of those videos, you want to know when they go up, so make sure that you do click that subscribe button if you have not already. But as always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.